Hello, welcome to this video and to 2024. Typically at the end of each year I have done a wrap up of all the books that I read the previous year. This year actually we're a little bit light. I'm actually looking at the list and it's only 29 books long, which is really low for me. I'm pretty sure last year I did 43. So I'm going to rank these and I think that most of them are going to be in this centre part here, and that's partly because I've been in a bit of a reading funk this year and I'm not sure whether it's because what I've been reading hasn't been that good or because I've just not wanted to read, and perhaps those two have fed off each other somewhat. But I started the year on a high note with Douglas Adams' The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, which is a pretty good book. It's been a long time since I read the first one and I didn't really remember much about it, but I liked this one. I just didn't think that Adams really landed the ending as well as he might. And I followed that up with the first of 3 Agatha Christie books I read this year, which was The Big Four, which is a collection of short stories, I think, about Hercule Poirot. It's not bad, it's not brilliant, but I was looking at sort of trying to write some shorts at this time of the year. It makes it feel like so long ago, and it's like because I was writing shorts because of the job that I was doing at the time, which is like 2 jobs back. I had 2 jobs since then. It's been a bit of a hectic year. So the Big Four was pretty good, but nothing really spectacular about it. I followed that up with Shakespeare's Landlord by Charlene Harris, which is spectacular. It's spectacularly boring. I really didn't enjoy it at all. I remember virtually nothing about it aside from like it was a murder centered around, a murder mystery rather, centered around a block of flats. When you read a book like that, you can see that it's trying to set itself up as a start of a new series, but it forgets actually to be good. Because a good book will set up a series much better than just going, oh, this is part of a series and I'll start with this sort of low-key one. Just goes to show how long ago this really was. I was still teaching when I read The Castle of Otranto. We're probably talking about March now. It's by Horace Walpole. It's one of the very first Gothic books. The Gothic genre and books generally have moved on a bit since this book came out. I didn't hate it, but I didn't think it was particularly good either. The highlight of the year at this point was The Dawn Attack by Brian Callison. What's really strange about this is I read 2 World War II books this year, and this one and the other one, which we'll get to, both feature Norway. This is an attack on a Norwegian village by the British to try and prevent the Germans from using the fish oil factory that's there. It's a pretty good book. It's action-packed. I enjoyed it. What year would be complete without at least one film tie-in? So I read Home Alone 2 by A.L. Singer, and it is pretty poor. But then the film is kind of a rehash of the first. It's almost like it's going to do something original and new, and then about halfway through it just goes back to the same formula as the first one. The book doesn't really translate the laughs, but then, I'm not sure how it could, to be honest. Another book that didn't translate any laughs was Star Wreck by Leah Ruwalinsky, which is a parody of Star Wars, but it should have picked The Next Generation or the original series, but it tries to do both, and then you end up in a book that's pretty slim with like about 30 characters all trying to do something, and none of them actually really doing very much of anything at all, so the book just doesn't go anywhere. Space 1999 Moon Odyssey is 4 episodes condensed into what is still a pretty tight novella with all 4 combined. Yeah, rushed, not very interesting. And I followed that up, which is interesting enough because Space 1999 was Britain's attempt to make a Star Trek show. And I read William Shatner's Star Trek Ashes of Eden directly afterwards. It seemed to retread grounds that Star Trek had been treading since about 1982, like aging Kirk. What's left for him to do in Starfleet is just like, well, get over yourself would be the first thing. It's all right. The second Agatha Christie of the year, Why Didn't They Ask Evans? Yeah, I quite liked it. Light-hearted and easygoing without ever being spectacular or brilliant. Shop! ! By Jasper Carrott is a farce set in a British department store that's probably a relic of another time. It has a few laughs and is certainly quirky and weird, but finally a bona fide classic on the list, Arthur Conan Doyle's Lost World. However, in terms of classics, as in like Dickens that you must read, or Shakespeare which you should read, or even some of the better stuff with Sherlock Holmes, a little bit meandering. I liked it. First of 2 Ian Flemings on the list. Live and Let Die, which is probably my favourite Bond film. Yeah, it was better than the previous Ian Fleming that I'd read, which I can't remember which one that was. I think it was Diamonds Are Forever. Not bad, but not any better than average. Another movie tie-in, well, TV tie-in in this instance, because it's Battlestar Galactica credited to Glenn A. Larson, who created the TV show, and Robert Thurston, who is a science fiction writer of his own merit. And it's pretty good. I like the TV show. Like this basically tells the story of the pilot. Got a few little deviations from here and there to keep it interesting, but it's nothing spectacular. Nor is The South Will Rise Again by J.T. Edson, which I did pick. I'll be honest, I picked it because I thought it might be quite controversial, but it really isn't. Nor is it one of J.T. Edson's better efforts. And there's a lot of self-referential stuff in it, which I've only read sporadically in the series, so I just didn't really get. The story's not told chronologically. I think they tried to make a beginning that was really catchy with, I think it's Dusty Fogg or Mark Counter. One of them gets killed, but you know that it's not going to be for legitimate. Follow that up with Lord Iffy Boat Race, which again is a farce by Bruce Dickinson. Yes, him, the one that sings with Iron Maiden. It did make me laugh in places, which, when it's a comedy, go, is that all you're asking for? But generally, just really, really bad. So I gave it like a 1-star review, I think, and I stand by it. But, you know, in the defense of it, it is funny in places, so maybe it's harsh. Another film tie-in. I read Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, the motion picture film tie-in, and, well, the motion picture is slow and laboured, and the book doesn't suffer quite so much with that. It's a little bit better in terms of pacing. A lot of Star Trek books are worse than that one. I followed that up with They Walked Like Men, an alien invasion story from Clifford D. Simak, which was one of the highlights of the year. Actually, I did really enjoy that, and definitely recommend it. Check out my longer review of that if you're interested. Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, one of the very first vampire books ever written. So again, another classic. I did dabble in something slightly more highbrow, but this is a bit melodramatic. Again, it's got that Victorian vibe about it. How long can your protagonist sort of not be aware of what's going on before they start to look a little bit silly? And, you know, it set the tone for a genre. To be fair, the vampire genre is not particularly good now either. So if I say it's good, then it's probably one of the better vampire books out there. Ed McBain's Cop Hater, the first in the Precinct 19 or 91 series. I can't really remember what the number is, but the book itself is a pretty good, hard-hitting 1950s cop procedural. Enjoyable, worth checking out. Jack Higgins, Toll for the Brave. You can't beat a good Jack Higgins thriller. You've got to at least have one a year. And this one, solid and dependable without having really any great oomph. Stephen Fry's The Liar. I love Stephen Fry, such a witty guy on TV, really charming and funny, and a lot of his TV shows, even going back to like Jeeves and Wooster, I used to enjoy as a kid. But this book I found just a little disappointing. Didn't feel like it was that inspired. It felt a bit laboured, really. Unlike Spike Milligan's Puckin, which I read directly afterwards, which I found really funny, really just as mad and crazy as you'd expect from Milligan, but really delivers on all fronts. It's a story about like a really small Irish village that by a quirk of bureaucracy is directly on the border between North and South Ireland as they're partitioning the country. So it's got a little bit of a sort of political commentary in there, but mostly it's just insane. Can't get a higher recommendation than that. I followed that up with A Quantum of Solace by Ian Fleming. This is the second Ian Fleming of the year. This is a collection of 4 or 5 shorts that all share the same name as a variety of films, James Bond films by the Broccolis. I found I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed the longer form of Ian Fleming's James Bond books. So yeah, I'd recommend that one. I quite enjoyed it, and I'm not really a big fan of short stories typically, but I liked all of the ones in there, and they were all a bit different, all sort of approaching Bond in a different way. So I really liked it. Something a bit unusual. Yep, third and final Agatha Christie of the year was Halloween Party, which I read because it was supposedly the basis for the latest movie, Haunted Museum. I can't even remember what it's called. A Ken Branagh film that came out this year was based on this book, but very loosely. It is the first Agatha Christie that I've read where you go, that doesn't make sense. That they would take 10 years to solve this mystery when it's pretty obvious what's going on, and people have known and just sat on knowing and not done anything about it. So it was the first one that I was disappointed by. One of the more interesting books, but not particularly well executed, was Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. The whole interview format of it doesn't help it dramatically or make it exciting or flow well. It's a really surprising choice, but then it is a catchy, sort of memorable title, so I can understand. But I think that that's what inspired that, rather than an author in touch with their muse. So I gave the book a fairly average review, but then I did another video based on just some of the ideas that it threw up, particularly around immortality. Then I read To Marry Medusa, about an alien invasion again, another one. This one is from Theodore Sturgeon, and again, I really enjoyed it. I thought that this was one of the highlights of the year. It's a really different look at alien invasions in that it's all sort of done through a hive mind across the space and stars. I never read anything quite like it, as I recall, and that's why I gave it a pretty high score. I recommend that one. I followed that up with another World War II book, which was The Waiting Game, about a submarine in the Royal Navy, which has a Norwegian crewmate on it. So again, I'm not quite sure why Norway is figuring so highly in World War II books. Perhaps a trick of fate. But Alexander Fullerton was a submariner, and his book has a fair degree of realism to it, but could do with just a little bit more excitement in the final act. There's a couple of really good scenes, particularly where the submarine is being hunted by death charges, but it could have done with a bit more oomph in the finale, I think. And the final book of the year, was Oscar Wilde's Dorian Gray. So another classic. You can see I'm veering around all sorts of genres here, trying to find something to just like give me that inspiring moment of, yes, you're back in love with reading and you should be doing more of it. Dorian Gray wasn't that book. It's really interesting in places, it's really witty in places, but it also feels surprisingly long for a book that's this short as it is. Its main problem, I think, is living up to the expectations around it, because the concept to it is so famous, and Wilde himself is so famous that you put those two things together and you expect magnificence. It doesn't really deliver, but it comes pretty close. It's a good book. So those are my 29, and this is the tier ranking of them. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget that you can get my books on Amazon if you so wish. There'll be a link in the description, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great 2024, everyone. Bye.